right, so UFC 319, what did we learn from this? I see a lot of people talking about Khamzat and the fight being boring, so on and so forth. So, one of the things that I would first point out is, and something that was really interesting, I thought, is that Khamzat, when you get to the crucifix position, he really didn't know how to land the best strikes that you can land in the crucifix. So, he's, kind of throwing these punches. When you're in the crucifix, it's really hard to get leverage to hit hard with the punch. Because your legs are tied up, you can't use them to push off any leverage, and one of your arms is tied up, so you're kind of hitting with the free arm, but you can't turn your hips or do anything like this. What you can do, and what he didn't do, is you can push the face down, because Dricus is burying his head into Khamzat's rib cage. He's grabbing around him as tight as he can, and then kind of burying his head. So what he could do is he could push off his face, push down on his face, and then slide the elbow in that way. And if you watch Matt Hughes, he was probably one of the best guys in the UFC at this particular technique. He would push the face down, and then you could slide. You get a little bit of space, and then slide the elbow through. And had Khamzat done that, he probably could have finished the fight in the first 2 rounds, either on cuts or by actually finishing Duplessis with the strike itself. Because the elbows create a lot of cuts, especially when you're bringing them from that angle. And he just didn't know it, or he wasn't trained it very heavily because it wasn't in his muscle memory. He was just kind of throwing these little nothing punches that weren't doing any damage, that weren't going to stop the fight. So that's the biggest takeaway for me, is he didn't really know how to effectively do the most damage from that position. Also, in the crucifix, it's one of the best positions to choke your opponent, actually. You don't have to get both hooks in to finish your opponent. Barrett Yoshida, a guy I trained with a lot, you can go to his page, Barrett75 on TikTok, Barret 75 on TikTok. He's probably the best guy in the world at finishing from the crucifix with the choke. It's really a staple of his game, and anyone in the jiu-jitsu community that uses the crucifix knows who Barrett is. And so that's another thing. He didn't really have a high game from the crucifix as far as submissions went. So when he got to this position, which I think he did 3 times, really couldn't finish the fight. He could control it, just couldn't finish the fight. Now, for people saying, well, this is boring, it takes 2 people to make a fight boring. The guy who's dominating and the guy who's getting dominated. So Dricus didn't possess the ability to make the fight competitive. So he contributed to the fight being as boring as much as Khamzat did. And one of the things that's kind of a lot of fans, I think, don't think about is, okay, you want to fight it, stand to fight up when it's no progress is being made. But if there's no progress on the feet, do you put the guys down? No one ever asks for that to happen. So getting a takedown is probably the hardest thing you can do in the gym against an opposing opponent. It's really difficult. It's really tiring. Getting multiple takedowns, forget about it. You got to be really good at wrestling and have really good cardio to be able to do that. And Khamzat got, I think, 11 takedowns. So, and there's also one other thing that people don't really take into consideration, especially new fans. The wrestlers have been dominating the UFC forever. And what the UFC did initially to try and stop some of this or make fights more competitive is they took away the knees to the head on the ground, and they took away the headbutt, which were the 2 things wrestlers were doing primarily offensively effective. They would pass guard, go to the side, and then they'd knee the head. Or they'd be in the guard and they'd just headbutt over and over again. So they took these rules out of there to make the fights more competitive. So what have the wrestlers done? Okay, they took away our 2 best offensive weapons. We're still just going to get as many takedowns as we need and either just, finish with a submission or punches on the ground. So they adjusted, but the UFC's contributed to this as well because they made it harder for wrestlers to finish, purposefully. So that's something I don't think a lot of fans take into consideration because they haven't been watching the sport since 1993. So it's a combination of things that contributed to what you saw on Saturday. All right, so I'm going to do a part 2 on this. So what part did Drickus contribute to making the fight boring? So there's always two people that make a fight boring. Everyone blames the guy who gets the takedown, who controls the fight. It's all his fault, you know? If he just would have stood up and had a real fight, it would have been exciting, right? Well, one, Drickus obviously couldn't stop the takedown. I'm not really going to be that critical of him there because he could have brought in world-class wrestlers, and I'm sure he did. I'm sure he brought in some good wrestlers to train with. It's going to be real hard to close that gap on a guy who's been training at a high level in a country where wrestling is extremely important in society. You're going to have a hard time closing a gap on someone who's been doing that for years and years. You could try. Some people make progress, but really there haven't been a lot of athletes that didn't come from that background that were able to close the gap. But GSP would probably be one of the outliers. But really, it's really difficult. That's why you see these guys like Merab and Khabib, Islam, Khamzat. These guys can be so dominant because it's hard to close that gap, and also because the UFC has emphasized striking so much within the rules that I don't think guys are developing well. This is something I saw Jake Shields mention, and it was actually a good point. When you're emphasizing one thing over the other, the fighters on your roster don't develop in the thing that is not being emphasized, which is wrestling. So guys who have a good combination of wrestling and jiu-jitsu can be very dominant in the UFC now because the other fighters aren't developing those skills. And now, as far as what did DDP do to contribute to the fight being boring beyond not being able to stop the takedown? I would say retaining the guard, meaning not letting the person pass, and also replacing the guard, getting your person back in the guard once you're passed. Those two qualities were non-existent in Duplessis's game. Khamzat would just push one leg down and just hop right into side mount. There was no resistance of the pass at all. And then once he got past, he could not get guard back whatsoever. So he had to turtle, which isn't bad. I did a lot of that when I trained. You're either going to carry the guy's weight on your chest by being on your back, or you can carry the guy's weight on your back by being, kind of on all fours. And at least you have your legs under you, some stabilization, some base that you could use to try and stand up or maybe try to sweep. There are sweeps you can do from that position, which Duplessis didn't try. A lot of those come from wrestling. But the biggest thing I would say is he couldn't retain guard and he couldn't recover guard. So he was never going to get up. He was never going to prevent the pass, and he was never going to get up. And so this is where he contributed to the fight being boring, because it takes two people. If you're getting dominated, you don't have the ability to prevent the fight from being boring. You're allowing that atmosphere to happen, that situation to happen, because you don't have the necessary skills to resist the person you're fighting. And it's easier said than done. Khamzat's dominating almost everyone he fights. The fight he had with Gilbert Burns, which Cormier mentioned, I think it was Cormier who mentioned it on the broadcast. Burns, because he has a good guard, it was hard for Khamzat to pass, and Burns could also threaten from his guard. So Khamzat would have to stand up out of the guard. So it's more of a stylistic thing. So someone who could give him a tough fight would be someone who could retain guard, who could attack from guard, and had a good stand-up game. That would probably be the person who has the qualities to beat him. Otherwise, you're going to get taken down. You're not going to be able to, stop the pass. You're not going to be able to recover guard, and you're just going to get pinned, and you're going to lose the fight. And something I mentioned in my previous video was Khamzat struggles to finish, from the crucifix and from being inside mount to begin with. He's going to go back and look at those things. His trainer's going to go back and look at those things and see, okay, what can we do, from the crucifix position especially, which you got to very easily. They're going to go back. They're going to fix those holes. So he's going to be a lot better and a lot more dangerous when he gets to that position in the future. Guaranteed. Because as soon as he got backstage, I'm sure people were, other fighters, when they talk back, they're probably talking to him about that stuff. And his trainers, so on and so forth. So they're going to go back and look at that. They're going to correct some of those issues. He's probably going to be able to add what I mentioned before, pushing the face and sliding the elbow through from the crucifix. He's going to add that to his game. And he'll probably put more emphasis on choking his opponent from the crucifix as well. Add that to his game. And then he's going to be really, really unstoppable. They can always go back and work on the stand-up more, but as he's polishing these smaller details in his grappling, his jiu-jitsu offense, that's where he's going to go to even a higher level. And usually that's what do when you have champions who are taking on all comers. They're gonna go to another. They're not going to plateau right here. They're going to increase. So he has the ability to do that, and I think that's what you'll see in the future.